The Canadian Armed Forces members have been abandoned by this Liberal government. They were forced to take medical treatment, and then they were injured, and some of them unalived, and these Liberals have abandoned them. And nobody cares. Welcome to Occam's Razor. Please like, share, subscribe. Yesterday, we talked about how Liberals are fear voting. In fact, there's nothing you can actually do to change their minds. Doesn't matter what information you present to them, they will still vote Liberal. That's not who this video is aimed at. This video is aimed at, hopefully, the people that have not decided to vote yet. Because I need to tell you that for some people, this might actually change their mind, but I don't know. Because most people have just put this in the past and they have forgotten about it. Talking about the Canadian Armed Forces, you understand that in a country, if you don't have a standing army, someone else will bring one in there for you, right? You don't have an effective military. The military has been effectively destroyed. When they brought in the jibby-jab mandates, they lost 10% of the Canadian Armed Forces. And that good 10% was a lot of people that were trained, and most of them had morals and ethics. The kind of morals and ethics you would expect someone to have on the battlefield to make the proper decisions as an ambassador to Canada when they have a rifle in their hand and they have decisions to make, right? No, you've taken those people completely out of the picture. Now what has happened since then? The Liberal government has used Canadian Armed Forces members as experiments. That's right. They experimented upon them socially and medically. In fact, they used them as an example to the rest of Canada for the jibby jab. When they were rolling this out and they were trying to get everybody to take it, the first thing they did is started to use their psychological narrative against those of us in the military. They told us it was coming, they were threatening what they were going to do, and then they went ahead and they did it. But it didn't faze some of us because we knew from what we were seeing out there that people that were taking the jibby jab were dropping after one shot. Some of them were not coming out of the hospital. Some of them were going to the hospital and coming out, but they weren't feeling well. This did not sit well with a lot of us. In fact, every time we tried to ask them questions about the jibby jab, they would just keep repeating the same mantra. This is the decision we have made. It is the best for all of the Canadian Armed Forces. Well, you made your decision, and now you lost a lot of people. These people went and did this on purpose. Let's go back a little bit to 2020 as people were taking these jibby jabs and they were getting ill. And there I was in my work environment in the Canadian Armed Forces. And with the propaganda coming out from the Liberal government, effectively turning anyone who questioned whether or not this injection was safe, we were being pariahed. We were being turned into second-class citizens. So there I was as a Canadian Armed Forces member, serving veteran, with 4 tours, several operations domestically, supporting international operations as well throughout my career, but as a serving veteran, now made a second-class citizen by the Liberals for refusing their medical treatment. And then, of course, eventually becoming unemployed, along with the other 10% of the armed forces. Now, here we are, 4 years later, and what has happened? Well, the Canadian Armed Forces, under direction from this very Liberal government, have decided to abandon Canadian Armed Forces veterans and troops that were injured by this jibby jab and abandoned the families of the troops that they unalived. See the splice there? I had to redo this part because I used the Kilo India Lima Lima Echo Delta word. And if I use those words on CommieTube, they take the videos down. Probably take it down anyway, just for the amount of information. And talking about the jibby jab. So these Liberals, this is what they did to the military. So now they have turned around and said basically, yeah, we're not going to support. We're not going to support anyone who's been injured or the families of those who've been unalived because, well, That's part of the no. It's actually we can't say it's part of the job because then we would have to give you duty of care. And so they're just abandoning the troops. Now I've covered this. The video is linked down below in the comments. All the information is there. The links are there. It's policy. There's a CDS Directive 003 that still requires people who join the Canadian Armed Forces to take 3 jibby jabs because the Canadian Armed Forces to the Liberals is only good for one thing, and that is to exact Liberal policy. It's not to defend Canada. It's to exact Liberal policy. I'll give you another example. There's a record-keeping system that we use in the Canadian Armed Forces for aircraft. In the early 90s, a new electronic system was developed. Aerospace data, no, correction, automated data and aerospace maintenance. ATOM, as they call it. It was based on an Oracle platform. It was the first electronic paperwork system that we used in the Canadian Armed Forces. And like anything else, we're stuck in a paradigm using specific forms, so they made the program look like the forms, and then we went from there. We went from there and we used it for years. In fact, there are several fleets still operating on ATOM, the legacy fleets that eventually will get retired along with this program. But in the meantime, the program still needs to be maintained because when it comes to certifying aircraft for flight, we need good record keeping. So what do the Liberals do? Well, they know the system needs to be maintained until the aircrafts retire. What do the Liberals do? Oh, no, 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 no. We need to spend more money on a new program, on a new data set to manage these. Oh, because that's all they do. They use the Canadian Armed Forces to enrich themselves and their friends. And who did they enrich with the Jibby Jab venture? Well, I don't know. How many hundreds of millions of dollars, or was it billions, left the country for these experimental mRNA gene therapies rebranded as a jibby jab for people to take? Now we know there is a negative efficacy on these things. There's other channels that have published this information. The information is out there. People don't want to realize it. But regardless, in the Canadian Armed Forces, you don't have any rights. Well, you do have rights, but they just ignore them. Right? You fall under 2 sets of laws, both civilian laws and the National Defense Act. So when they order you to do something that is contrary to your own rights, they don't have a right to do it. But in this case, they did it anyway. That's right. And the psychopaths who did it in the Canadian Armed Forces did it gleefully and happily. They sat us all in their offices, they sat us all in rooms, and they explained to them why they wanted to do it, and they held their little meetings with the senior staff, and they said, you know, it's a closed doors, you guys can talk about anything you want here. And we told them, well, I told them, my other peers wouldn't tell them, they were too scared. I told them they were suffering from cognitive dissonance and that them just following orders is not going to excuse their behavior in the future, just like it didn't for those funny people in the 1930s Germany. That's right. Eventually, the truth always comes out. And that was the other thing I told them. The truth always comes out. Eventually. Well, I don't have to worry about the adverse events. But anybody who joins the Canadian Armed Forces now and is coerced into taking 3 jibby jabs just to stay employed, they're going to be wondering the rest of their lives when those adverse events are going to come for them. The risk-benefit analysis is not there. It just is not there. You have a cross-section, where you did, in the Canadian Armed Forces, of the healthiest, fittest people in Canada. A pretty good cross-section. Do PT on a regular basis, supposed to be eating healthy, working in a good environment. It's a high-stress environment at times, but that's what the PT is for. Good services. We take care, well, we used to, in the Canadian Armed Forces, of our soldiers. And if anyone would have been healthy enough to fight off a really bad flu, it would have been a Canadian Armed Forces member. But as it turns out, the military games in the fall of 2019, a bunch of them came back sick from China. And we know when they came back, they all probably came back infected with the COVID stupidity. But we'll never know because they didn't test them. A lot of them did come back pretty sick. Yeah, they kept that out of the news. And it's been brought up a few times since, but nobody's talking about it. Just like they are not talking about the fact that Canadian Armed Forces members have been abandoned by this liberal government. They were forced to take medical treatment, and then they were injured, and some of them unalived, and these liberals have abandoned them. And nobody cares. Nobody cares. The press isn't covering this. People are acting like, no big deal. You're making a big deal out of it. I'm not making a big deal out of people being unalived. I'm not making a big deal out of people losing their careers. I'm not making a big deal out of people being harmed for the rest of their lives and then being abandoned by the state that did it to them. And that's the liberals who've done this. That's the bloody liberals who've done this to the Canadian Armed Forces. And if you really are a patriot in Canada and you want to have your country survive, then you need a military. And the liberals have done everything to destroy it, just like they did under Pierre-Elliott Trudeau, just like they did under Jean Chrétien, just like they did under Paul Martin, and just like they're doing now under Carney, and prior, of course, under the tutelage of Mark Carney, little Justin Trudeau. You have destroyed the Canadian Armed Forces. Now, I know some people from the forces might even see this and completely disagree with me. I didn't take the jab, and I was forced to release. But all those other people that you forced out the Canadian Armed Forces, and you gave them Canadian version of a dishonorable discharge. You people are the dishonorable people. You people who did this, you psychopaths who forced people to keep their jobs by taking this injection. You people are the psychopaths. You people are evil. You people have destroyed the Canadian Armed Forces, and you should never, ever be in a position of authority again for the abuse that you have put your members through. This is Occam's razor. I think I've ranted enough on this today. Please vote sensibly, because if you're voting liberal, you're voting for more abuse, you're voting for more evil, and you're voting not to have a military. You're not voting to have a country. You're going to vote for a party that has been effectively enriching themselves and destroying Canada in the process, and you liberal voters are falling for it. Have a nice life, liberals. This has been Occam's Razor. Like, share, subscribe. We'll talk to you later.